most people listening to this show are probably familiar with Yellowstone National Park. It's the park with the geysers, right? The hot springs, the geysers, Old Faithful. There's also the buffalo, and there's all the ecological issues around the killing of the buffalo that's still ongoing there. But there's a connection between Yellowstone and this place in northern Nevada, which is today called Thacker Pass. And in the Paiute language, the name for this place is Pahimaha, which translates to rotten moon. And I can tell the story of that a little bit later on in the show. But the connection between Yellowstone and here is that 16 million years ago, the hotspot, the magma that comes up through the Earth's crust and heats these hot springs and creates all this geothermal activity in Yellowstone National Park today, 16 million years ago, that was here. That was in this location. And that's why there is lithium in the soil here. Lithium is the third element on the periodic table. It's a metal. It's very lightweight. In this location, it's in the form of a clay. So there was a supervolcano here, just like there is in Yellowstone, and all of this erosion and sedimentation and natural geologic processes after the supervolcano moved along, it created an abundance of lithium in this area. So corporations have been eyeing this lithium for a long time. It was actually first discovered in the 1970s by an oil company that came out to this region actually looking for uranium. There's also uranium and other minerals in the soil around here. And at that time in the 1970s, lithium wasn't very widely used. It was used a little bit in medicine, in chemical production and plastics, used in some rockets and military weapons. Lithium is also used in thermonuclear weapons and different types of nuclear reactors, interestingly. But at that time, the demand for lithium wasn't very high, so it wasn't worth it to build a mine out here. What has changed since the 1970s is that global warming has become a huge focus for the environmental movement, for corporations, for governments all around the world. And with good reason, it should be a focus. It's a serious issue, of course. And what has happened as a result of that is we have seen a boom in the demand for electric vehicles to transition away from gas and diesel powered cars and trucks to electric vehicles. And it's also created a boom in demand for batteries, giant batteries, to store energy from solar and wind power. The sun doesn't shine all the time. The wind doesn't blow all the time. And if you go to flick on your lights in the middle of the night, people expect the lights to work. So if you're going to have a lot of solar energy and a lot of wind power, you need ways to store that energy and provide it to people and businesses when they want it. This is where batteries come in. And the dominant battery technology today is the lithium-ion battery. And this is why there's a huge explosion in the demand for lithium. There are something like 1.6 billion or 1.4 billion cars and trucks in the world today. And the vast, vast majority of those, more than 99%, are internal combustion engine vehicles. They run on gasoline or diesel. And to transition all of those vehicles, to replace all of them with electric cars, would require an incredible amount of batteries. And I just want to throw out a few numbers here to help people get a sense of the scale of this explosion in demand for lithium. The first is a quote from the CEO of American Lithium Corporation, which is different from Lithium Americas, which is the company that wants to mine here at Thacker Pass. He says, "The future demand for lithium is truly staggering. Battery demand is rising at the rate of 2 to 3 mines per year by 2020. That was a quote from a couple years back. And here's another quote from Megan Siebert and Bill Reese, who recently released a scientific paper. I forget the name of the journal they published it in, but this is the quote. It says, "An entire year of production from the world's largest lithium-ion battery manufacturing facility, which is Tesla's $5 billion gigafactory here in Nevada, could store only 3 minutes worth of the annual U.S. electricity demand. Manufacturing a quantity of batteries that could store just 2 days worth of U.S. electrical demand would require 1,000 years of gigafactory battery production." storing only 24 hours worth of U.S. electricity generation in lithium batteries would cost $11.9 trillion, take up 345 square miles, and weigh 74 million tons at enormous ecological cost. They continue, a battery-centric future means mining gigatons of rare earth mineral ores. For every kilogram of battery, 50 to 100 kilograms of ore needs to be mined, transported, and processed. Constructing enough lithium batteries to store only 12 hours worth of daily power consumption would require 18 months worth of global primary energy production and the entire global supply of several minerals. Most people, I think, don't realize how powerful fossil fuels are. And I don't say that as a fan of fossil fuels. I say that as somebody who's been fighting the oil industry, the coal industry, the fracking and gas industry for a decade now, who's taken direct action against those, been involved in multiple campaigns to fight the extraordinarily destructive fossil fuel industries. Nonetheless, most people who advocate for the transition to electric vehicles, to solar and wind energy and so on, don't realize how powerful fossil fuels really are, how much energy is embodied in them. And when you consider it, it's really quite obvious, because a fossil fuel is millions of years worth of photosynthesis that's compressed by huge geologic forces into this incredibly energy dense substance, right? And it's simply impossible to replace that with something like solar or wind energy. And to compare lithium-ion batteries to oil, the average lithium-ion battery today stores about roughly 1/50th as much energy as there is in a gallon of diesel. So for a similar weight of battery versus the same weight in diesel fuel, you've got about 50 times more energy in the fossil fuel. And again, I'm not arguing for fossil fuels here. What I'm saying is that people don't understand the scale of the transition that is being proposed and the amount of damage that would do to the planet. And that's, Thacker Pass here, Pahimaha, is a case in point, because this mine that is proposed for this one site here in northern Nevada, this is traditional territory occupied land of the northern Paiute and western Shoshone people. Their land was taken by force, by violence. They never signed a treaty. It was annexed unilaterally by the United States government. The mining company wants to destroy 28 square miles for this one lithium mine. Just one mine. And there are thousands of lithium mining claims in the state of Nevada alone. When people come here, I'm looking out right now at the land here. I'm in Thacker Pass right now. I'm in Pahimaha, and I'm on the north side of Thacker Pass, which is this broad saddle. It's this broad mountain pass between two flat-topped mountain plateaus. And to the east is the Quinn River Valley. And from where I'm sitting to the eastern side of where this mine project would go is about 7 or 8 miles. It would extend for another mile or two to the west of me, for about half a mile to the north of me, and about 4 miles to the south of me. So this is a massive, massive area that they're talking about destroying. And of course, I'm not sure that I really believe in the concept of sacrifice zones. In fact, I think that's a pretty abhorrent concept. The idea that there are areas in nature that it's fine to destroy. I don't think that's true. I think everywhere is important for one reason or another. Nature is not only more complex than we know, it's more complex than we can know, right? So often when we cause harm to the natural world, or when capitalists, the dominant culture, causes harm to the natural world, they do so ignorant of that harm. They do so not understanding the processes that they're interrupting, the cycles of life and the natural communities that they're destroying are often completely overlooked. They're not understood. They don't even know the damage that they're doing. And so here at Thacker Pass, we do know some things. We know that this is a critical migratory corridor for pronghorn antelope, who are still at a fraction of their historic levels. We see pronghorn, but usually herds of about between 5 and 20 to 30. I actually saw about 20 or 15 or 20 this morning. And, if you imagine that these pronghorn are maybe at 1 to 2% of their historic numbers, seeing herds of 100, 200, 300 must have been an everyday occurrence basically across the entire Intermountain West for thousands of years. And they're really barely hanging on, like so many creatures at this point. Another one of those species that's barely hanging on is the greater sage grouse. If people aren't familiar with the sage grouse, they're a sort of chicken-like bird, mostly ground-dwelling bird that lives in the Intermountain West, between the Cascades and the Sierras and the Rocky Mountains. And they feed on sagebrush. They depend on sagebrush very heavily, hence the name sage grouse. And they've been hammered since European colonization. Their numbers are at between 1 and 3% are left. So 97 to 99% of them are gone. And the reasons for this are very clear. It's overgrazing, the cattle really hitting these sagebrush landscapes hard and eating up a lot of the food that the birds rely on. It's oil and gas drilling. It's urban sprawl. It's highways and different types of development. The thing about sage grouse is, like so many species, they're very sensitive. They don't like noise. Even noise from a road, for example, can be really harmful to them. So scientists will have numbers. Biologists could tell you the numbers on this. But here at Thacker Pass, there are multiple sage grouse breeding areas on the mountains just to the north of the proposed mine site. And they're within, the closest one is less than a mile, I believe, from the boundary of the mine, the proposed mine. And they're going to be using heavy equipment down here, explosives. It's going to be a very loud operation. And that type of noise has been shown time and time again to result in sage grouse abandoning that breeding area. And these breeding areas are the foundation of the sage grouse species. They're called leks, and they go back to them year after year after year, generation after generation. They go back to these leks, certain areas on the land, and the males strut and walk around and make their incredible song where they inflate these chest sacs, and the females hear them and come flying in from miles around. And this is how the species continues through this beautiful, incredible process. We were lucky enough to walk up there this past April. Early in the morning, we got up around 4:30 or 5 a.m. and hiked up onto the mountain and snuck in quietly. And they're pretty busy hanging out with each other and doing their thing. So you can get relatively close with binoculars and observe them if you're quiet and respectful and not disturb them. And it's incredibly beautiful. It's been inspiring people for thousands of years out here. A lot of the indigenous communities throughout the Intermountain West have special songs or dances or ceremonies somehow related to the sage grouse because they're such an incredible creature. It's an otherworldly experience to be up there in the pre-dawn and to hear the females flying in over your head coming from every direction and hear the males singing. And these leks, these breeding grounds, might be destroyed just by the noise from this project. That's not to mention the thousands of acres of old-growth, beautiful sagebrush habitat down here in Thacker Pass itself that would be directly destroyed and bulldozed and crushed by the mining operation itself. And that habitat, this isn't breeding habitat down here, but this is habitat in the wintertime especially, when the top of the mountains up where the leks are full of snow and the weather's harsher up there, the winds are stronger. The sage grouse tend to come down in elevation to places like Thacker Pass or Pahimha to find shelter. And there's so much wildlife that lives in this area. There's spotted skunks and foxes and coyotes. There's mule deer and burrowing owls and meadowlarks and sage thrashers, and the list just goes on and on. There's even an endemic species of snail, which means The only place it lives in the world is here in Thacker Pass, on the west side, northwest side of the pass, in 14 springs that emerge from the mountain. There's a snail who only lives there in the world. That's its entire home, is here. And this is what's at stake for this one lithium mine. So it's important that people recognize that when we are advertised to, when we are marketed to and sold this idea that we need cars and that they should be electric cars so they don't produce as much carbon dioxide, one of the sacrifice zones for this to happen is places like Thacker Pass. And the species, the beings who are being sacrificed are those sage grouse. It's those pronghorn antelope. It's those mule deer. It's the golden eagles who nest in this area, who also are basically allergic to a lot of human activity. They don't like noise. They don't like buildings. They'll abandon their nests. They'll leave and never come back. And it's not like there's more habitat opening up elsewhere. This type of destruction is happening all over the state, all over the West, all over the world. So whether it's lithium mines or new highways being constructed or urban sprawl or the expansion of agriculture, oil and gas drilling, just a huge influx of hunters into an area, whatever it is, there are too many people doing too much destructive activity. And, the wildlife, the land itself, the water, they're all dying the death of 1,000 cuts. I learned about this mine, this proposed mine, when we were researching for Bright Green Lies. And I decided to visit the site back in October of last year, almost exactly a year ago from when we're recording this. And when I visited the land here, I fell in love with it. It's beautiful. It's an incredible place. And it's one thing to love a place that is well protected, like a forest inside a national park, for example, right? There are threats to it. Global warming's a threat, air pollution, overuse from tourists, and so on. All these things can be a threat. But it's different to love a place that's on the chopping block imminently, right? That has the headsman's axe hanging over its neck. And especially to love a place like this that feels so unloved to many, by many people, right? There aren't many people who are questioning the electric vehicle narrative, who are fighting to protect places like this. There are some. There are certainly some. There are people fighting industrial wind and solar energy developments here in Nevada, in other places all over the world, in Hawaii, in Norway, in Sami territory. All over the world, people are fighting these types of projects, in Mexico, in Colombia. And there are also people fighting lithium mining all over the world, whether it's in Chile or Argentina or Serbia or Portugal, or here in the United States. There are people fighting back against this. But we're in the minority because so many people have been convinced that this is how we save the planet. If you're going to commit a mass atrocity, you need to have a justification for it, because some people are sociopaths and they're just willing to just hurt people for no reason and be evil for no reason. But most people aren't sociopaths, right? So the only way to get them to go along with an incredibly destructive process is to justify it to them in their minds. And this is what we're seeing here at Thacker Pass and all over the world with this transition to a green economy. We're seeing the justification being laid out for the commitment of a mass atrocity across the entire planet. And, visiting this place and seeing what was at stake and realizing that nobody was going to fight for it unless I stood up and fought for it, it put a lot of pressure on me. It put a lot of pressure on me, right? Because it's easy to stay home and say, this is right and that's wrong, and these are my morals and this is what I believe in. But it's a lot harder to do something and to put in hour after week, after month, after year, after decade of hard work, to build people's consciousness and to cheer people on and help people articulate their ideas and build strategy and help organize groups and so on. that's a lot harder than just sitting at home and saying, we should save the forest or we should not blow up the mountain, right? And that was what I was feeling back in October, November, after I'd visited this site and I knew that it was on the brink of destruction and I wanted to stop it. I felt a lot of pressure. I felt like I've got to put my money where my mouth is. And so along with Will Falk, we set up a protest camp here on the site of the mine. That's where I'm sitting right now, in the middle of what would become a open pit mine, 400 feet deep and several square miles in size. We set up camp on January 15th. So we'll basically be right at the 9-month anniversary that people have been on site for that entire time with no breaks. Some people have been rotating in and out, of course. Not people haven't been here the whole time unbroken, but I've been here more often than not for the last 9 months, trying to fight to save this place. And we're taking a bunch of different strategies. We are fighting in the courts. There are 3 lawsuits against this project. One is by some environmental groups, one is from a local rancher, and one is from several tribes and native organizations in this area. And Will Falk is actually the attorney on that case. He's a really good friend of mine and co-founded this camp here with me. We're fighting in the public opinion realm. So we're engaging in outreach and doing interviews like this, talking to the media, writing essays and making videos and doing photography, trying to explain to people what's really going on out here. We're working to put pressure on public officials and on the agencies that are responsible to this, for this, like the Bureau of Land Management, which is part of the Department of the Interior under Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Indigenous Secretary of the Interior. And we're also engaging in direct action. We're here on the land. We are protecting this place. Our bodies are here on the line. And if they try and show up to destroy it, then I think there's a high likelihood that some people are going to put their bodies between the machines and the land. I have been committed to this type of land defense and to the planet for more than a decade now. And so, in one sense, building up towards taking action like this takes a long time. And it has taken a lot of commitment and just trying to get out there. I've done everything over that past decade that you can imagine. I've written letters to the editor. I've made phone calls to politicians. I've been part of protests. I've gone and engaged in some direct actions. I have tried to go out and support different camps and campaigns like this. I have signed on as a litigant to a lawsuit that somebody else was doing. I have just tried a bunch of stuff. So in one sense, I think doing something like this is part of that extended process of trying to figure out what does it really mean to show our solidarity and live our solidarity with non-human life, with the earth, with the water, the mountains, with this, this incredible creation. I don't say that as a creationist per se, but with this creation that we are so blessed to get to be a part of. After visiting this site and falling in love with it, particularly, a lot of the questions that we had to deal with were just practical. How are we going to stay warm? Do we have the right boots to get out there in January and have warm feet? Where are we going to get some firewood? What kind of tent are we going to try and get so we can stay warm? How do we get our supplies together? And then other logistical questions like, who can help us with outreach? Who can help run a website? Who can come out and join us on site or deliver supplies to us? Can we get some legal support to help protect us from threats and so on? A lot of practical questions like that. But I think in a big sense and an important sense, any project like this, any worthwhile project of any sort, there's a big element of jumping off the diving board, right? There's a big element of, it's like when you walk up to a cliff jump at a lake, if anybody's ever jumped off a cliff into the water or something like that, or jumped off the high dive, at a swimming pool, you're nervous, right? You don't know exactly what's going to happen before you jump. And there's a big element of faith. There's a big element of just moving forward, because there's so many times that you can talk yourself out of it. And, I say this now, 9 months into the campaign, it's hard work. It's grueling. I have a home. I have a beautiful little wood cabin that I live in. My fiance is back home. There's good food in the fridge. There's chanterelles in the forest that we could be out picking right now. My friends are back there. My family, I miss my nephews. Like, it kind of sucks to be out here doing this, right? Like, it's not like this is the best time ever, and I wish that I was doing this all the time in my life. Sure, there's some really wonderful and beautiful things about it. I've made some incredible friends spending all this time on the land. It's also just practically, it's pretty grueling work. And so there's a big element of just going for it, right? There's a big element of just surrender and just saying, you know what, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than my comfort. And this is something that I want to do. You start with nothing or almost nothing, and you figure it out as you go along, and I think that the most important step in that process is the emotional step of feeling fear, feeling trepidation, and feeling the unknown, and just deciding, screw it. We're gonna go for this. We're gonna do it. And I hope that people build up the support systems that they need to be able to do this kind of work, in terms of family and friends and trying to get your life together in the different ways that are necessary that enable you to do this kind of thing, because we need a lot more of this. And it's, practically speaking, it's not easy to do, but I think it's really important. Since we got here, everything has been so uncertain. We haven't had a single month where we felt safe, everything was secure, there were no problems, everything was going on. We probably haven't had a week like that, right? Maybe a few days here and there at a time where our stress level goes down, but there's always something to deal with. There's always something that comes up. And so it's really important for us to just be able to try and focus and just say, okay, this is what we need to get done today. And this is what we're going to focus on tomorrow. And then the next day, who knows, because something else is probably going to come up and we're going to deal with that and respond to that. I think that the mining company didn't expect this level of opposition. They expected people to just go along with it, because that's what people usually do. And so I think people would be surprised at what we can achieve if we actually try. And I was lucky enough to be mentored by some older activists when I was really coming of age as a community organizer, a decade ago. Well, when I, started to take it more seriously, at least. And one of the things that they taught me was that the most important thing is to just show up and not give up. And that's so true. And it doesn't really matter what the issue is. If you're willing to just be committed and show up again and again and again and not give up, then you're going to make some sort of difference. And, that doesn't mean that you're going to save the world and figure out every problem, because that's just not the world that we're living in right now. But we can achieve a lot more than we think if we just show up. As far as how people can do something similar, I think that, if people want to reach out to me and have a conversation about what's going on in their area, I'm always happy to share knowledge and share ideas and ask questions and try and help people get on the right direction. I think, trying to get a team together, even a small team, this was just started by a handful of us. But, it wasn't just one, it wasn't just two, it was a small group. That makes a big difference, especially if they're people and can trust and like to be around and work with. That helps a lot. What's happening right now is that The BLM is threatening to come in here as soon as October 22nd and start doing an archaeological dig, which the native people are calling for-profit looting. For-profit looting of their cultural sites, the massacre site, the sacred sites out here. This would be done by a for-profit archaeology company that would be hired to come in and pull out artifacts and remove whatever they find from the site, which is legally required before the mine can go forward. So we have multiple tribes suing the BLM, writing letters to the BLM, speaking out in the media, opposing this desecration, and we're supporting them. That could happen as soon as October 22nd, as I said. And so we're hoping to get more people out on the site. We want people to call public officials, including Deb Holland at the Department of the Interior, the new head of the Bureau of Land Management, Tracy Stone Manning. Let them know what's going on, leave a message with their assistance, with any people, put pressure on those agencies. Help us reach out to media and get this story out there further and further. We need more people to come to camp and spend time here, especially people who can be trusted to hold things down, to make smart decisions, to not be rash about what's going on. We need folks to come and help us hold down the site. As we're moving into the winter, it's getting pretty harsh out here in terms of the weather. It can be cold and windy. We had our first snow the other day. Didn't really stick around, but it was blowing in sideways for a little while there. And so we need people who are willing to come out and stand with us on the site and endure that kind of winter weather. We're not really sure, like I said, how exactly this is going to play out. It's possible that a bunch of folks could be in jail by this time next month, and the mine construction will be moving forward. It's also possible that we'll have pushed them back and had some sort of small victories on this project. We just don't know. It's really up in the air. And so we need whatever help people can offer us, platforms, bodies, people out here on the front lines, any sort of legal help, donations. So folks can learn more on our website, which is protectthackerpass.org. And I hope to see some of you out here on the land.